Genetic Alliance's series of webinars, Managing the Massive Measures, Real People's Real Data Made Useful. This is Sharon Terry. I'm the President and CEO of Genetic Alliance. I'm also a REDCap user. Genetic Alliance is a member of the REDCap Consortium, and our Genetic Alliance registry and biobank, which we established in 2003, uses REDCap as our basis. And our new project, the Platform for Engaging Everyone Responsibly, now one of the PCORi funded projects, is also using REDCap. So we're very delighted to hold this webinar on something that we think is a major tool for the research community. And Stephanie Duda from Vanderbilt's Data Coordinating Core, who's also a research assistant professor of biomedical informatics at Vanderbilt, will tell us all about it. Before she starts, I just want to say this webinar is recorded, which means that all of you can review it later. You can see it probably within a week on our archives of webinars, and you can also send the link around to other people you think might be interested. So you'll be able to see the slides, hear Stephanie's presentation, and then also be able to hear the discussion again. If you have a question, we definitely invite them and want them because they actually constitute the latter half of this webinar, or about half of it. And so we're asking you to use the question box on the right-hand side of the screen in your GoToWebinar control panel. That question box is a place for you to type questions at any time at all during the presentation, and then I will be putting those together, triaging them in the sense of getting them in some kind of order for Stephanie, and then I will ask them to her in groups of logical order, one hopes, if I'm logical, and I'm sure she will be. So without further ado, I'm going to pass this over to you, Stephanie. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Sharon, for that lovely introduction. It's a pleasure to be here and get to speak to all of you about REDCap. I'd like to cover several REDCap topics today. Sort of from the creation of REDCap, a brief history and its use, to the latest developments and what's new and what's next. I'm hoping it will take about 35 minutes so that we'll have plenty of time for a discussion afterwards. So just to start off with the brief history, back in 2004 here at Vanderbilt, Dr. Paul Harris, who then later becomes the inventor of REDCap, was working with many researchers on their data collection projects. And he was seeing some incredibly depressing things, like large data sets being maintained in Excel, and then they were getting lost because the Excel files would be corrupted. And investigators were losing years of research, or they were having small slip-ups in their data that seriously affected their data quality. So after conducting a needs assessment, he found that researchers really needed help managing study data for small to medium projects. And his hypothesis is that researchers would do the right thing if we provided them with an easy way to do it, if we provided good software that did not take forever to learn. So in his process, he identified sort of three key goals for the software. The first is that it had to sort of safely handle the data. It had to provide secure storage for all the protected health information. It had to have audit trails and authentication. It had to be easy, so an intuitive interface for the researcher. It couldn't require programming and complex computer science algorithms. And it had to be fast. It shouldn't take you days to put up case report forms for a very small study. So he needed a single methodology that would sort of support multiple different types of studies. His solution was to build a metadata-driven application. That means we didn't have to do any programming that was project-specific. You could mock up your forms using sort of general concepts, and that would be interpreted by the REDCap engine, and you would see nice forms on your screen. In 2004, the very first project launched in what was called the Research Electronic Data Capture System at Vanderbilt. And that's how REDCap gets its name, is from those letters highlighted in red. It was a big hit here, and in 2006, Dr. Harris, whose picture you see there on the right, he formed the REDCap Consortium. to share the REDCap codebase with other universities and to foster collaboration around REDCap for its future development. So for those of you who aren't familiar with REDCap, I wanted to give you a walkthrough of the interface. If you have a project, I want you to come away with a sense of whether REDCap would be a good fit for it. And if you ever end up using REDCap, I want you to feel a little familiar with its interface already. For those of you who are seasoned REDCap users, I apologize that this might be a little dry. In the meantime, I would suggest that you visit our website at projectredcap.org and poke around while I'm going through some of the REDCap basics. So when I want to create a REDCap project, I visit our Vanderbilt REDCap instance, and this is our usual login screen. Once I've put in my username and password, here's what I see on REDCap's home screen. If I click over to my projects, you can see I have a huge list of projects that I've created and maintained in REDCap. All of these projects are active projects. You can see from the green dots on the right-hand side that these are production projects, which means they're no longer in development, which has one of those little edit pencils instead of the green check mark. These are ones that are collecting live data. So to create a project, you would go to this next tab at the top, which says Create New Project. And here's what the Create a New Project interface looks like. REDCap prompts you to enter a project title and to tell it how you're going to be using this project. So you have several options to pick. You can say it's just for practice, in which case they won't ask you any of this other information. But if you say it's for quality improvement or for operational support or for research, then REDCap will prompt you to enter some additional information. For research specifically, there is a field for your IRB approval number. This is because some institutions choose to confirm that you have valid IRB approval before they will sort of enable your new REDCap project. That's not the case here at Vanderbilt, but some institutions do sort of implement that for their regulatory processes. Once you've filled in the information, you can see this question with 2 radio buttons here at the bottom. You can start a project from scratch, which means it will be a completely blank project, or you can begin with a template. If you start with a template, you have a selection of different ones to choose from. You can choose sort of forms for basic clinical data collection, forms for a cancer tissue biobank, a multiple survey study, a randomized control trial, etc. And all these templates are fully editable. So you can create your project using one of these templates just for the one-click convenience of it, but then you can go in and change all the forms and the names of the variables and the content and so on. So here I've created a test project based on a template. And you can see this template has a single form. It's listed over here on the left called Basic Demography Form. On the left hand in the blue box, you'll see the REDCap menu. And that has all of your homepage links and your special functions. We'll take a look at those special functions later, but for now let's take a look at this Project Setup tab at the top that has the blue arrow. The Project tab lets you configure your study. And looking down, you can see a bunch of red dots for sort of features that are not enabled currently. You can click through those and enable them. To use longitudinal data collection, where you develop a single form and use it across different events. You can have public surveys. You can have your records be auto-numbered. You can use a scheduling module, a randomization module, and so on. And in order to develop your data entry forms, I really recommend using the online designer when you're starting with REDCap. It's got a great point-and-click interface. And this is what it looks like here. So this online designer is coming pre-populated with some fields because we imported a starting template. And you can add fields here using the Add Field button, which is surrounded in a red box. If you click Add Field, it'll take you to a dialog box here where you can pick the type of field that you want to add. And that includes text boxes, multiple choice questions, yes/no questions, etc. Once you've built your form, it looks like this for data entry. And you can see sort of from top to bottom some of the features that REDCap provides for you. It has a link at the top for you to download your forms in PDF format, and those PDFs can be either blank if you needed to distribute a paper form for some reason. That's been very common for when we are running studies in resource-limited settings where the power might go down at some point and we have a bunch of these paper forms pre-printed. And because we know that the paper forms are generated directly from REDCap, they match one-to-one and makes data entry on that, later on easier. So this link would let you download the auto-generated PDF versions. Next, you can see a link to upload files. There are lots of variable types with human readable labels, and REDCap also offers built-in data format checks for dates and phone numbers and email addresses and so on. On the left here, you can see that we actually have more than one form in this project. We've added additional forms. So this project has demographics, baseline data, months 1, 2, and 3 data, and a final form for completion data. REDCap also has things like equations, so you can enter the date of birth and it'll automatically calculate age if that's an equation that you put in. It has variable coding behind the scenes, so this question about ethnicity, Hispanic or Latino, etc., these might be coded 1, 2, and 3 on the back end, which your statistician would certainly prefer over these long text labels. There is also branching logic, so if you see the question about gender selected as female, if you select that, then the next question pops open, has the patient given birth before? If you select male, then that question will be hidden and the respondent will not see that question. There are also matrix style questions and slider bars. So let's take a look at the record status dashboard that's shown here on the left. The record status dashboard is great for sort of an overall status snapshot of your data collection. It shows you the status of each form in every record. So you can see that in these grids here with these different dots. Some forms have been marked as complete, and so they have a green dot, whereas others are incomplete with a red dot, or they are unverified, which is a yellow dot. At any point during your data capture process, you can use the graphics and stats module in REDCap to view your data. It creates these tabular and graphical summaries of each variable, like you see here. This, for example, is a sort of plot of our REDCap Consortium partners and the longitude of their institutions. So the big cluster on the left that you see, that's the Americas, where most of our partners are located. And moving to the right, you see Europe, and then finally Asia on the far right. So there are a lot of things that you can quickly learn from REDCap's built-in graphical tools. So one of our policies and beliefs here is that nobody really knows your research as well as you do. I think that's true. And that's why REDCap is designed for and controlled by the researcher. We've built a lot of different tools into REDCap because researchers have expressed a need for them, such as the participant scheduling module, which is incredibly useful if you have to schedule visits between particular windows for patients. There is a data de-identification module. When you're exporting your data, you have an option to remove identifiers, to hide the study ID, or even to shift all your date values, which allows you to comply with sort of the HIPAA safe harbor requirements. There is also an option for setting up longitudinal events. And finally, REDCap has an API. This allows programmers to sort of build external connections to REDCap. REDCap also has a really strong focus on data quality, and this is one of my personal interests because a lot of the work I do is just deeply integrated with data and data quality. So REDCap has validation and data cleaning tools that improve the data quality at the front end. That includes validations. When you're setting up your fields, you can select any of these types of validations. Several different date formats, emails, integers, phone numbers. And REDCap also has a double data entry module. This would let two separate people type in the same record and you compare their work to identify typos, for example. And finally, a data quality module. This lets you set up sort of more complex cross-variable data checks. And you can run those rules on a regular basis. Getting your data out of REDCap is easy too. There's a one-click export here that you see on the left, and an advanced export on the right that lets you pick your variables. The advanced data export is the one that gives you all the de-identification options, etc. The data exports to many different statistical software packages too, like SPSS, SAS, R, and Stata are the ones that you see here, along with just straightforward Excel files. And finally, we have security and audit features in REDCap for those of you who are involved in routine regulatory processes. So these are very granular user access controls that REDCap provides and detailed audit trails. The audit trails lets you see who has changed a form or who has viewed a form. And there's also the REDCap shared library. This is where REDCap users have implemented validated forms and they've received approval to share their implementations of those validated forms from the authors of the instruments. So you can browse the REDCap library and download any of these forms into your project. The button you can see is circled in blue right there. So here I'm implementing a practice instrument that we have at the top of our library, and it's about nachos. And here the survey appears in my project. So this look with the black bars and without the REDCap sidebar, this is how surveys look in REDCap. Anyway, I hope that walkthrough gave you a bit of an idea of what REDCap looks like and what its features include. So next, let's take a look at how we use REDCap. We found here that the software is very flexible. We've certainly used it for clinical research, from sort of very small observational studies to large-scale clinical trials. It's been used for basic research, tracking bench work. Personally, I use it often in global health. I've used it to run surveys of over 500 HIV care and treatment sites around the world to collect capacity information. It's used in community research and also often in operational support. But our REDCap usage around the world is so diverse. We've heard of people using it to track bird migrations. We've heard of people using it to track resource use on a clinic on a floating island in a lake in South America. So there are definitely many uses for REDCap in many settings. It's certainly great for multi-site studies too, and there are two ways you can kind of go about setting up REDCap for multi-site studies. The first is to use a centralized model, and this is where many sites access a single REDCap installation. This is what I do mostly for my projects. So I will develop REDCap forms, and I will create user accounts for all of my collaborators in Latin America and give them access to my forms here at Vanderbilt. We use REDCap's data access groups feature to sort of sequester each site, so each site only sees and manipulates its own data. There's also a decentralized model, and this is something that you can leverage when all of your collaborators have their own copies of REDCap. And a nice thing about REDCap is that your forms, you can export the templates for them into a text file and send it via email to your collaborators. And they can take that same text file and import it into their system and instantiate forms that are identical to the ones that you've created. So this way you can collect identical information at different sites and merge it later. I also frequently use REDCap as a teaching tool in my classes, especially when I'm teaching clinical research informatics and data management best practices. It's been surprisingly useful for my students. They've come and told me that they end up using it for other coursework later on or for their thesis preparation. So I'm glad that we can use this tool to sort of empower researchers and make the process of data management less technical and easier for them. REDCap also helps us to solidify data management plans before enrolling patients. I've encountered this in several projects for which I've been handed stacks of CRFs that I've been asked to translate into REDCap. And when the CRFs don't map to any sensible workflow, it gives you a very concrete reason to go back to the research team and say, let's revisit this. So REDCap doesn't make it impossible to develop a bad study design and a bad study plan, but it does make it harder to do so. We've really grown very far beyond the expectations we had for REDCap back in 2004. As you can see here on the right, the Vanderbilt system currently houses almost 21,000 projects and well over 15,000 users. And this is completely excluding all of the practice projects that people have put into our system. And I suspect that includes many valid projects that people labeled as practice because they did not want to enter all the information that we saw during the project creation phase. So you can see some of these projects do not contain surveys, are purely data entry, but the majority are projects that contain surveys. There are primarily research projects, and if you open up the subcategories, you'll see that that includes trials and registries, etc. So you can see a snapshot of our 1-week statistics on the left. We handle lots of concurrent users, and you can see the peaks on the weekdays and the sort of flatter little mounds on the weekends when not so many people are in the REDCap system. And on the map on the bottom, you can see sort of Vanderbilt faculty, staff, students, and their collaborators all over the world are logging into REDCap. And this is just use in 1 week. The REDCap Consortium, like Sharon mentioned at the very beginning of this call, is the network of institutions that have their own REDCap systems. All nonprofits and government organizations are welcome to join the REDCap Consortium. They can visit this tab in the center of the screenshot here called Become a Partner, where you can read through the REDCap End User License Agreement, which is full of legal language, but basically you're agreeing not to share the REDCap code with third parties and etc. And if you do so, then Vanderbilt will process your application, and then you'll receive permission to download a copy of the REDCap software. All of that happens at no cost. On the other hand, REDCap is not a desktop application. It's not like Microsoft Excel. So you can't just click on it on your desktop and it automatically installs itself and you have an icon right there. It's server software. So you need to have the right computer hardware, you need an IT team to set it up, and then you'll be accessing it through your browser. We're really lucky to have consortium partners from all over the world right now. The consortium has been growing intensely over the past few years, and you can see that here on the graph on the right, REDCap Consortium size versus time. This when the consortium started out in 2005, 2006, and now how it's sort of growing exponentially. We have over 1,030 consortium partners from 80 countries, so hopefully that means there's a consortium partner near you if your site is not already a REDCap Consortium partner. Since REDCap was built to help researchers, we also see it being referenced in publications as a measure of its success in meeting those goals. And we're just shy of 1,000 papers that have cited the REDCap software. We keep track of these using an automated script that looks for references to the REDCap paper and the REDCap grant funding number in PubMed. So all of these are automatically pulled and collated on the REDCap website after a little bit of human review. And finally, the part I like most about REDCap, besides the consortium, is that it's constantly growing and evolving to meet new research needs. So one of the newest features is the data resolution workflow that's pictured in these 3 slides. It gives you a formal data query workflow for auditing or for source document verification in REDCap. So if you start off in the top image, you can see it looks like a regular data entry form, but some of the fields have a green check beside them. That means that those fields have been validated. For the next fields, further down, you see there is a little speech bubble. You can click on that speech bubble and open a sort of the data resolution workflow for that particular variable. That's what you see in the center box here. You can open a query on the variable and say, this doesn't look right to us, or this is failing some of our data quality checks, or we checked it against the source document and it doesn't match, please correct it. Then an email is automatically sent to the person at the site who's in charge of the data maintenance, and they can go in and make appropriate corrections, send a response to you, and you close the query. All of that workflow is tracked in a metrics graph on the right, so you can go and see if perhaps some of your sites are responding to queries faster than others, or maybe some have fewer queries than others, indicating their data quality is better. Our next development lets you pull data from the EMR into REDCap for studies, as long as you have proper IRB approval. So Vanderbilt has a homegrown EMR system. So the actual EMR connection doesn't necessarily map to other institutions. That's the downside, is that we can't just package it and hand it to other groups who have REDCap and say, here you go, because they wouldn't have the same EMR system. However, we are sharing the interface, and we're definitely sharing the lessons that we've learned in putting this together. Vanderbilt's research data warehouse, which is shown in the center here, it pulls in data from the clinical enterprise, and that's all the dots that you see on the right. That includes laboratory data, pharmacies, admission, discharge, transfer data, and so on. It preserves both of those in both an identified and a de-identified copy of the data in our research data warehouse. And either of those can then be pushed into REDCap using this dynamic data pull, is what we're calling it at the moment. We're piloting it in 10 studies currently, and we're finding that we're seeing extreme improvements in both the timeliness of the data that is available to researchers in these studies and the accuracy of the data, because there is a lot less of manual typing. And finally, I know that patient-reported outcomes with PCORi is a huge focus now, and Genetic Alliance is involved in this work too. So I wanted to address how it might be relevant with REDCap. We're exploring sort of gray areas right now between REDCap and the clinical systems for our PCORi work. The first one of those is the dynamic data pull from the EMR, which I discussed on the previous slide. We're getting very close with that work. We're hoping that these pilot projects will sort of inform the last mile of our development, and then we can really push to have more users at Vanderbilt submit IRB applications to use this tool. The second is to put REDCap inside the EMR and the patient portal. Inside the EMR, we want to make data collection forms available. So if you want to capture some sort of structured data for your particular study or other reason, operational quality improvement, and the EMR does not facilitate that type of data collection, then you can insert a REDCap form that is sort of skinned like the EMR and enter your data into that. The second one is use of our patient portal. We would like to, for PCORi work, to automatically send out surveys for patient-reported outcomes through the patient portal. but we'd like to run those surveys through REDCap. So we're having a separate module here that sort of inserts REDCap into the patient portal workflow, and you'd see these as maybe messages from your provider's office or sort of surveys that have become available for you to complete. And we'll skin it to look like the patient portal, even though it's REDCap on the back end. The work that we expect will make the greatest near-term impact on PCORi efforts for us is that we're implementing the promised computer adaptive tests in REDCap. We've had the static short-form surveys in the REDCap library for a while, but this is new. So you'll be able to search for these cats in the shared library. And that's what you see on the top left. It says 17 results, for example, and all of the ones are labeled with a star, and it says they are an adaptive instrument. So you'll be able to import those into your REDCap projects. That's what you see here on the bottom screenshot, 2 promise assessments, also marked as adaptive tools that are now part of your data collection instrument flow. When you use those assessments, you'll end up with what looks like single question instruments, like this anxiety instrument or this pain behavior test. And when you hit the next page on one of these questions, it will sort of bounce out and contact the promise server to find the next question and what the next question should be based on the respondent's sort of selection of these radio buttons. And finally, we're looking at automatic distribution of gift cards for participants who complete a survey. So I'm sure many of you have experienced this part. Doing it manually can be extremely tedious. Oftentimes we have to collect people's social security numbers, which is awkward, and people sometimes prefer not to get the gift card rather than give out extremely private information. So what we're exploring here is a use of Amazon's sort of company model and building a plugin for REDCap that will sort of leverage our Amazon bank account. The challenge is that Amazon requires an institution to commit to paying $25,000 out in Amazon gift cards or other usage from a single account in 1 year. It's a sort of use it or lose it mechanism. And it's not likely that a single grant would probably have that great of an expenditure of gift cards. I mean, you never know, but probably unlikely. And you can imagine the concern of having multiple grants sharing a single account and the bookkeeping that goes along with that. So that's something that we're currently working through to see if it's appropriate on the regulatory end, but we really think it could save a lot of time for study staff. And the challenge that we plan to face after that is to develop a model for electronic informed consent in REDCap. This will be something that's new for us, and we're still in discussions with the IRB about what they would like to see in an e-consent model. Do we need to have people sort of sign with their finger in a little box? Is it enough to type your name? That sort of thing. Anyway, if you would like to learn more about all of these tools within REDCap and REDCap's features, we have lots of videos and tutorials that are available on our website at projectredcap.org. So I encourage you to visit the site and explore some of these tabs. This video resources in particular has a great brief overview of REDCap, which is only 4 minutes long. So if you are trying to introduce REDCap to colleagues, that's a great video to show them. And for any of you who might be interested, Dr. Harris and myself and our colleague Firas Webby actually teach a Coursera class on data management for clinical research. Coursera is one of those massively open online course providers, or MOOCs, and this is a 5-week course. It's completely free, and it covers general topics in clinical research data management and also REDCap. We use REDCap for a lot of the sort of hands-on work in this course. The upside is that in taking this course, you get free access to a REDCap installation during the course period. That REDCap installation is for research, or not for research, only for educational use. Part of that is because we run it on Amazon's servers, so it is not approved for any type of PHI storage. However, if you are interested in sort of experimenting with REDCap to see if your project fits into the REDCap model, this would be a great way for you to get sort of free access to a REDCap installation and tinker around with it. Don't feel obligated to take any of the quizzes or do any of the assignments, but you're most welcome to do that and participate on the forums and have discussions with us about research data management also. Our next iteration of this course begins June 2nd, so that's just in a few weeks. And if you sign up now, you'll get plenty of reminders, and feel free to share the news with your colleagues. And I'd also like to acknowledge some of my coworkers here who provided many images for this talk that I might not have had access to otherwise. Those would be Paul Harris, Vita Elliott, Rob Taylor, and Brenda Miner on the REDCap team. And a big thank you to all of you and to Genetic Alliance for having me here today. So I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Stephanie, for a wonderful webinar. Now we'll take questions. Our first question is REDCap designed to serve as a long-term data store or warehouse to hold data from multiple surveys over time and to be queried by researchers? Or is it intended to be used for the collection and storage of data only while the study is underway? Thanks very much.
Yes, all of your REDCap data can be stored in the system as long as you would like. You can archive your projects when they're finished, and they will continue to sort of be backed up in the system. As far as I know, none of the institutions that are running REDCap have a policy of sort of deleting projects after they've been used. But that is something that will depend on your local REDCap installation.
Super. A couple questions about cost and installations. If you could just go over that again, some desire to understand, are there costs associated with REDCap?
Definitely, that's a great question. So there are not any costs associated with getting the REDCap source code. So that is a package of PHP files and SQL scripts that your IT team will need to run on their servers in order to create this REDCap instance. However, there are sort of hidden costs in having somebody who will maintain your servers, who will update the REDCap installation, and then somebody who's going to provide sort of the routine REDCap administrator support, somebody who will maybe create those new user accounts, somebody who will approve your data changes in production studies. So what we generally advise for groups that are starting off setting up a new REDCap install is to plan for half an FTE of an admin person who's going to sort of manage the REDCap control center, and that's sort of your user management, etc. And then half an FTE of somebody who will do your systems administration. So that would be an IT person. It definitely varies by institution what you need. If you're a smaller group, you might not need that much effort. You might sort of have a single person who's running a REDCap install for a single project. But those are sort of our general starting recommendations.
Super, thank you. Does the purpose of project, which you showed in the beginning, have a surveillance or a public health surveillance option? The comment is those of us with exemptions from HIPAA for surveillance are loath to call anything we do research in a public forum, even though the format for data collection is very similar.
Oh, that's a good point, and I don't know if I can answer that one off the top of my head. I do believe there is an other category, so you could conceivably put anything in the other category.
Okay. Another question, a little bit more weedy. How's the addition of hooks coming for the user community to use with plugins and extensions? How does the REDCap team choose where to put these hooks?
Oh, and this is definitely a hot topic. And whoever you are who is asking this, I hope you will be joining the REDCap call that happens at 1 p.m. Central today. That's for anybody who is a sort of systems administrator or an administrator of a REDCap instance who belongs to the REDCap Consortium, because our lead programmer, Rob Taylor, will be talking in great depth about the hooks system, which is something new that's just getting built into REDCap that will allow you to maybe do some more dynamic things on your data entry forms, add some custom functionality or change the look of something. I think it's still somewhat undefined, all the range of things you will be able to do with these new hooks, but we're all very excited about it. So please come hear Rob speak.
Super. Could you talk more about the statistical analysis of data within REDCap? And I'll do a shameless pitch for our next week's webinar, too, on I2B2, which may, in fact, because it's integrated, offer a little bit more of that. But could you talk about the analysis of data within REDCap?
Yes, and let me add to your plug about, I bet an I2B2 webinar would be fantastic, so I would encourage people to attend that. REDCap's sort of graphical data view and statistics tool is not very in-depth. It just gives you a single variable by variable sort of analysis of what is the range of data in this numeric value, or what sort of answers are you seeing in the checkboxes. So it's not something that can take the place of a statistician for your study. However, REDCap does offer a great range of data export formats, and statisticians are usually really happy to work with REDCap export data.
Great, thank you. If an entity develops database, data work, studies, does Vanderbilt own the work?
No, Vanderbilt does not own any of your forms, any of your data, anything like that. We strongly believe in supporting research, but we have absolutely no intent of co-opting anybody's research.
And regarding surveys, does the person completing the survey have to use a computer with REDCap installed, or can a survey be completed online from any computer?
Actually, you have to complete it online. There's no way to install REDCap just like that, because it's not like Microsoft Excel. It's not something you'd install on your laptop. So you would access it over the internet, and you could do that from a desktop, a laptop. You can do it from your iPad, your iPhone, lots of different devices nowadays.
Super. Are there translation services offered?
So the translations of REDCap into different languages are something that's being maintained by the REDCap community. So our team, unfortunately, we are not very multilingual, so we can't provide these translations ourselves. However, many of our REDCap Consortium partners are in foreign countries, and they have sort of banded together to create groups that maintain the different language translations. I believe there's somewhat up-to-date Chinese translation, Brazilian Portuguese translation, a Spanish and maybe a French translation, all of which would be listed on sort of the internal site for REDCap administrators. And you can download those files and sort of install them into your REDCap installation.
Yeah, and I kind of want to make a comment here about how easy it is to use the central REDCap system, the libraries, any of these translations, etc., in one's own installation, as we have, and that in fact the kind of communal nature of the REDCap user group, and I'm not a especially astute IT person, but I do get the daily digest and find it very useful because the community itself is working out all sorts of issues all the time, and so the kind of collective making sure that what we need is getting done is quite amazing. And in fact, we recently had an experience where for our PCORi grant, we are looking at putting all of the common data elements that NIH finds useful into surveys, and those were not strictly coded in the REDCap system. We coded them and in fact improved upon them by making sure they were tied to PROMIS and other validated instruments, and have been talking to Paul and to Stephanie about then uploading that into the library so that others don't have to go through the same process. So I want to really put a big plug in for the kind of co-op nature of REDCap.
And the enthusiastic sort of users and collaborators in the REDCap Consortium like yourselves are really what makes this community so great. So thank you to Genetic Alliance.
That's fabulous. Is there a REDCap mobile app such that patients in a longitudinal study would be reminded or alerted weekly, for example, to provide data such as completing a dietary questionnaire?
There is not a mobile app at the moment. Ask us a year from now. You might get a different answer, but I can't commit to anything. However, you can use REDCap to send out survey links in an automated fashion. So you could easily send these survey links to somebody's phone's email address, and that would show up as a text message, or you could send it to their regular email address and they could certainly open it up on a phone. But the nice thing about setting up these survey schedules is as long as you think through the logic and survey B needs to be sent out only after survey A has been completed, and we want it to be sent out 10 days after survey A is completed, etc. Once you work through all of that and kind of document it in REDCap, then you can just forget it and trust that your survey reminders and sort of survey links will be sent out according to the schedule.
And Stephanie, there is a new PCORi grant application out there, proposal application for building a mobile app. So maybe REDCap should apply for that.
Oh, now that would be a nice idea.
Yeah. Next question. Would this tool be useful for a QA project within the lab? For example, collecting large amounts of data to validate the new lab system?
That's a good question. I have not used, I assume you're thinking about the data resolution workflow, or are you just thinking about sort of using the system to create forms to collect data in parallel to your existing system and then compare them? I definitely think REDCap could be used in either of those fashions. I personally have used REDCap for many source document verification exercises, and the sort of auditing exercise itself was quite tedious, but getting to use REDCap for it and not having to worry about paper forms and all sorts of handwriting on those paper forms and crossing things out and has been heavenly.
Super. Is REDCap intended to serve as a primary research repository for query by researchers?
Sorry, for queries by researchers?
Yes.
I'm not sure if I completely understand the question, so I apologize if I'm misinterpreting it here.
So I think it means if, for example, and this is a good use case for the project that we're doing, we're collecting lots of data from lots of people with lots of conditions, and it is going to be queried by researchers who are interested in, comorbidities or pain across many populations or fatigue. Is REDCap enabled such that researchers can query a data set like that?
At the moment, REDCap has a reporting tool, which is relatively basic. It allows you to look at the entirety of the data within your project and sort of select different variables that you want to pull into a report. Sort of spicing up this reporting tool is on the to-do list for the REDCap programming team, so it's quite possible that by this time next year, we'll have something more exciting to use for these report generation exercises, which are sort of query execution exercises. The nice thing about the reporting tool is it does let you download subsets of data. So you could pull out just the variables you want and download them and sort of look at them within your statistical software. So that's one approach. However, REDCap does have sort of this computer interface with the API. And if you have another system that's sort of maintaining your queries, you could easily, with some programming support, get it to talk to REDCap. And it would send the queries through REDCap using this API. And REDCap would implement those and send back sort of the data answers. So that might be a way to manage it if you have your queries and data management in a different system.
Okay. Can you talk about when and if you will enable REDCap for use of OAuth 2 and ID Connect standards?
As far as I know, it's not in the works to center REDCap around any particular standards at the moment. I admit I'm not deeply familiar with those two. But if it's something that a user is very interested in, there's always the REDCap community, and you could interact with them to see if there's interest in doing custom programming for a REDCap plugin around particular standards implementation.
Okay, and just one comment there, because our peer system, the platform for engaging everyone responsibly, which does in fact manage e-consent and does permission management for both the participant as well as the researcher queries, does use those standards, and I think we're going to see that more and more. So we can talk about that offline, Stephanie.
Sounds great.
Can you talk more about the security of PHI and the federal guidelines? Specifically, this questioner is interested in knowing if it meets the FIPS 140-2 standard.
Oh, goodness. What's the FIPS 140-2 standard?
I'd have to Google it. We do have people who are viewing who do know that well, I'm sure, and if they want to send me a message, I will update that question while you work on another question.
Well, I can tell you in the meantime that our Vanderbilt REDCap installation is in a HIPAA-compliant environment. However, we also do run a FSMA low and a FSMA moderate environment with separate REDCap installations. And those are for our sort of research or operational projects that require sort of FSMA compliance. We do not at the moment have any REDCap projects that are running in a Part 11 compliant environment for sort of FDA drug trials, et cetera.
Okay, and I knew Dixie Baker would come through for me, who's serving as one of the PCORi and one of our consultants on security and privacy. So FIPS 140-2 Annex 2 contains current encryption algorithms endorsed by NIST.
I do believe that there has always been sort of lively discussion about REDCap security issues in the consortium, and that many of our consortium members regularly hammer REDCap and their own REDCap installations with various sort of testing software. I believe REDCap is using sort of encryption to store all of its user identification, proper sort of hashed and salted passwords and so on. I don't know what exactly NIST requires of its applications, but I do believe REDCap is considered highly secure by many of our collaborators.
Okay. Can REDCap be used by IRBs to process applications?
Yes, it can. And actually, you are asking a very interesting question because it's something that Vanderbilt is looking at right now. Our IRB was getting a little bit fed up with their existing system, and they came to Paul Harris and they said, Paul, could you have REDCap do this? And could you design, a few extra plugins to facilitate our workflow for sort of IRB document processing, et cetera? So I would say the answer is definitely yes. I don't know what additional sort of workflow features it might require, and I think that's something that our team is exploring right now.
Super. That might be a good webinar follow-up in a couple months once you guys have explored that.
It might be a little bit longer than a few months, but definitely, I would say so.
No pressure, no pressure. Another question, are there any plans to add sample management features like barcode printer interface? And generally, can you speak about integrating REDCap with LIMS systems? So, for example, Genetic Alliance is a good example. Our biobank has a contract with a vendor that keeps our bio samples, and then we have our REDCap registries. And so talk about the integration between LIMS and then whether you have plans to add sample management features like barcode printer interface.
I think that's a great topic, and I admit I just put in a small funding supplement to explore it in a little bit more depth. So if it gets funded, we may have a little bit more information on that soon.
Super. And if you need letters of support, there's a bunch of us that are happy to do that. And then another question here. Could you say a little bit more about BioView, which is, I know, quite unique to Vanderbilt in some ways, and has been highly touted as a really interesting way to bring patient samples, et cetera, into the research environment, and talk about how that interfaces with REDCap.
Oh, you know, I admit this is not one of my great areas of expertise, but we do have a special service core here at Vanderbilt that handles this work for researchers who are using REDCap and sort of BioView together. BioView is our opt-out model for collecting these samples and doing sort of genome analyses, etc. And then we connect that to the de-identified patient data, and the whole package together is supposed to be de-identified, and then make it available for researchers to search for identifying study cohorts, etc. I believe it is possible to pull some of that data into REDCap for further collection of sort of related information while you're doing your work with the samples, but I couldn't speak to that directly, unfortunately.
All right. Well, you did speak to a lot directly, quite fortunately for us, so we're very happy to have had you in this webinar series, and we're coming to a close, so I want to thank you very much and thank you for your work throughout the year on a really wonderful tool that makes life much easier for all of us who are trying to encourage moving forward into translational science and not just the kind of basic stuff that we have seen before in the world.
Well, thank you very much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Wonderful. And I'll call the viewers' attentions to the screen. You're looking at our Standards and Tools webinar series. We have a whole host of webinars coming up. We've had several already, and those are in our archives, which are quite easy to discover on our site. We've already done Phenome Central and Phoenix. REDCap was this week. You're able to view the webinars right on the same page, so you don't have to go anywhere else. After this REDCap webinar, the recording will go up in a couple of days or a week or so, thanks to our wizard Jeff at our office. And then our next webinar is on I2B2, which is next Thursday at noon. This, as we said during this webinar, is a scalable framework that allows clinical researchers to use clinical data for discovery. And it it's also funded by the CTSA network, like REDCap, and it integrates with REDCap. So we encourage everyone to join that webinar and to keep looking at this page for updates. We are adding webinars as we go, since we are getting lots and lots of good ideas from the wide community about what they want to see. So let us know what you want to see, and thank you all for attending today. Again, thank you, Stephanie.
Thank you, everyone.